Hello and welcome to another episode of the Meet the Translator podcast. My name's Dot and today I'm joined by JC Penet, a lecturer in translation studies who's written a textbook on working as a professional translator. We're going to chat a bit about the aims and purpose of the book, where JC got his insights for it, and what it might take to become a professional translator. Hi JC, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today. It's really lovely to have you here.
Hi, Dot. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I know your podcast quite well, and I'm very excited about this because it's a great podcast. It's a great honor to be here today.
Oh, thank you. I think it's going to be an interesting one. So, should we start off? Can you share a little bit about what it is you do as a lecturer in translation studies and how you sort of got into the field of translation?
Yes, so I work at Newcastle University, and there I teach on the undergraduate program and the postgraduate program. With quite a range of courses that I teach. On the undergraduate program, I teach a bit of translation theory, although I try to hide it. So it's a bit like when you try to feed wean a baby, and you've got to try and feed them some veg, so you hide the veg into like some other foods, and so that's what I try to do with the first years. So we talked about the big principles, but I don't give them the names behind it, and then we do that in the second year. And in the final year of the undergraduate program, that's interesting because I love that module because I get them to work in simulated translation agencies. So they've got to create their agencies, and they've got complex translation projects, and we really learn through doing. And I think the students develop so many skills by doing that. And then on the postgraduate program, I teach a module called the language industry. So it's a module where I try to teach students to read the language industry that's become so complex, and to think about potential ethical issues, not just for themselves, but also with the industry, because it's not always the most ethical industry. Well, not very many industries are ethical, to be honest. And then there's a module on institutional translation, so like translating for the European Union, the DGT. Another one called Translator Entrepreneur. So again, that's they've got to create a translation agency, but it's more the marketing side, branding, etc., etc. So yeah, I've got quite a lot to keep busy, but it's a lot of fun. And how did I get into translation? That's always an interesting question. So, however much I'd like to see myself as Asterix, Asterix le Gaulois, I'm very much of an Obelix. I fell into the cauldron with a magic potion of translation studies, but I fell into it quite late, unlike Obelix. So I did a PhD in Ireland I finished around about 2009, but a year before I really needed a job. And I was teaching French studies at the time in Dublin. But then the whole recession happened. Don, maybe you're too young for that, but there was a massive, big recession. I'm not sure. But anyway, 2008, 2009 was really, really bad. And I lost my teaching at DCU through no fault of their own, just budgets were cut. And I found a job at the University of the West of England in French studies. So they gave me all my nice teaching, like this is what I've been trained to do. And they say, oh, by the way, you've got also to teach 2 classes on the MA translation, and I was like, no way, I'm not doing that. I really didn't want to, because I kind of remember the way translation was taught when I was at university. It was just, like with no, you barely had a dictionary. You had to do it with no resources, mostly literary translation, and the way it was marked was very much, this is the source text. This is what you should have said. Very prescriptive. And I absolutely hated it. I thought it was just, it was not for me. But teaching that module that had been developed by experienced colleagues who were fantastic, I thought, oh, actually, I'm quite enjoying this. And then I got the bug. I thought, that's really interesting. And I got more and more into it. And so gradually I got into translation studies. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. It's a long answer.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's really interesting because I feel like I love hearing how people sort of get into it almost more than what they're currently doing. I like hearing how they got into it because there's always so many different ways, and I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's
um,
called a planned happenstance, isn't it? There's a whole theory around that. We plan our careers meticulously, and then things happen in life, and planned happenstance is the idea that you can take advantage of the opportunities that come your way, or they might not
mhm,
even seem to be opportunities at first, but they end up being opportunities.
mhm.
I do mention that in the book actually, because I think we should all be aware of that. We're
Yeah.
always told to plan carefully what we're going to do with our lives and our careers, but we need to keep an open mind because
Mhm.
sometimes things come your way and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. And actually, you absolutely love it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that kind of helps me as well in like when things don't go the way that I hoped, or like, if I don't know, a job that I really wanted to work on and I don't get to work on it or something, I just tell myself like, okay, well, the universe is just freeing me up for whatever else is coming. Like I can't, like, I don't know, something
Yeah,
better
no,
will come. Like,
I agree with you, Dot. I'm a firm believer in that, like it was not meant to happen. There must be something else in store for me. Yeah. I mean, my
yeah,
career and what's happened in my life, I mean, yeah, you can call it career if you think of the word careering, going from one side of the street to the other in an uncontrolled way. That's my career. It
mhm,
was not really planned, but
yeah,
yeah, there's been like difficult times, when it didn't go my way, but lots of great opportunities. I think that would be true of a lot of translators as well. I can
mhm,
imagine that a lot of them feel a bit
yeah,
that way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure they do. So let's talk about this textbook that you're writing or have written
Yeah.
called. So it's called Working as a Professional Translator, right?
Yes.
Can you sort of say a bit like what's the book about? What's the purpose of the book, and who is it sort of aimed at?
So something that I've noticed in the last few years, and we can talk about it again later on, but is that a lot of my students, who go into translating, they're really passionate about translating. They really want to do that. And yet, when they join the profession, a lot of the time, well, many of them stop within 6 months to a year.
Hmm.
And I, no, I'd noticed that in the last few years, and I thought we must be doing something a bit wrong. There's something that we're not preparing them for.
Hmm.
So sometimes translation programs insist a lot on the translation skills, and rightly so, language skills, and they're essential. And obviously, that's you can't be a translator without that. But I think that we need to make sure that they're ready for the industry they're going to be joining, which is not an easy industry to join
Hmm.
by any stretch of the imagination. There are lots of opportunities, but lots of threats as well. A lot of the time, those students, they set out with the best of all intentions, but they were not ready to market their business, to approach translation agencies, LSPs, to say, please remember them here that exist, to basically fight for it.
Hmm.
So I want to write a book that kind of help them with that, and also I want to write a textbook that will also not be prescriptive.
Hmm.
So a lot of the books that exist on the topic have been written by professional translators, which is great. Like, that's something that I haven't got. See, I don't have that lived experience as a professional translator. I'm an academic, but sometimes they describe their situation and what happened for them and want it to apply to other people, but everyone's got to a slightly different situation. So the whole
Hmm.
approach in the book is to bring the latest research from what can be called language industry studies, the latest research from what's going on for translators, what's happening in the field, bring it to the students in an easy to understand way, and then help them reflect on that and what does it mean for you and your own situation, what you want to do
Hmm.
as a translator. So to always situate it for their own needs and aspirations. So it's a non-country specific book. So I don't talk about being a translator in the UK particularly, and it really takes a reflective approach. So yeah, I use my experience as a coach, to kind of ask questions, make them think about it, because I think that's fundamental. There are so many ways of being a translator,
Hmm.
so many different ways, that is, I can't say to somebody, being a translator today is this and this and that, because tomorrow it might be something very different for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like every translator I've spoken to, I mean, I speak to a lot of translators, I have a lot of translator friends, and like everyone I've spoken to has a different, it's like they're doing something slightly differently, or they've got into it slightly differently, they built their business in a different way. Like
Yeah.
you're right, there's like a million ways of doing it.
So it's whatever works for them. But yeah, in the book, so there are three parts. The first part is joining the profession. The second part is on the job, and the last part is continuing to grow as a professional translator. And for joining the profession, I talk about the kind of skills and qualifications that they might wonder, do I need this? What do I need to be a translator? That's a question we hear a lot. I'm doing a master's degree, but what else do I need? You don't even necessarily need a master's degree, to be honest. That's not a prerequisite. Then I mentioned career paths, so freelance, in-house, and mentioned portfolio careers. A lot of my students feel very relieved when I mention to them the concept of portfolio careers. So this idea that you are, say, a translator, but you're also a podcaster, or you're also a language teacher. You don't have just one hat. And I think can't remember the exact statistics, but I would say it's about 60% of professional translators who have a portfolio career. So it's very, very common. Except that it's still a bit taboo sometimes. Like, if you're a successful professional translator, surely you work full time as a translator. When say, well, actually, maybe that's not what you want. Even maybe you want to do different things and have a finger in lots of different pies. So then we'll talk about support networks, the importance of building your support networks, not to feel isolated, because you can feel quite isolated as a translator otherwise. I mean, it makes financial sense because obviously you can get more business through your networks, but it also means that it improves your well-being, and that's very important. And then I talk about finding that first job, like what to do to try and get the first job. I mentioned test translations as well. That can be, well, problematic in some ways, so be careful with them. Talk about writing your CV and seeing your CV as a translation task. The way you tailor your translations to your client's needs, and that you would think about what do they want, the functionist approach, where you take that to your CV, and every time you see a job or you apply for something, think about your client and rewrite your CV accordingly. Translation job, basically. Then I talk about dealing with clients. An important concept throughout the book is that translators are service providers. So to be a service provider, you think about who your clients are, what do they want, how do I get to know them. Talk about managing your translation projects. I borrow quite heavily from Callum Walker's book. You had him on the show. Callum wrote a really good book on that. And then the last part, I talk about the sustainability. So I talk about marketing your business, so the kind of marketing side of things, but also the last chapter, and that's the one that I care quite a lot about, is how to make sure that your own job remains sustainable, but also how to make sure that the whole profession remains sustainable in the age of AI and all those technological changes. And so I talk about self-care for professional translators and what they can try to put in place, on an individual basis, but then again, collectively, what can they do to ensure the sustainability of the profession? Yeah, I've talked too much, haven't I?
No, it's good. No, it's like it's really interesting because it shows that you cover so many different things within the book, and it sounds like a really sort of well-rounded selection of different topics that will be really useful for someone who wants to be a professional translator. Sort of before we go further into that, how would you define a professional translator? I know that obviously we've mentioned professional translators have a million different forms, but how would you define that when you're writing a book about working as a professional translator? How do you define professional translator?
It's a really hard one. That's the question that when I saw that question, I thought, oh gosh, how do I? I think the answer is that I would try not to define them. And that's see what I mean? Because I know it sounds like a non-answer, but that's an honest answer. That because you can wonder what is translation these days, and
Mhm.
translation can be so many, many, so many, many, many things. It's just vast, isn't it?
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, you've got to kind of try and define them. And if I was to say that students, they would say, well, we'll just doesn't know anything about it then. But I think the more you know about translation, the more you're reluctant to define professional translators.
Mhm.
Um, if I had to give some core definitions, well, obviously you've got to be bilingual. Well, bilingual. You don't have to be bilingual as in like speaking both languages bilingually, but you've got to at least be able to read the source text really, really well and master your own language extremely well. And bicultural, that's probably as important, if not more important in some ways. But that's not enough. That's just the starting point, isn't it? Because not everyone who's bilingual slash bicultural can be a professional translator. You've got to understand what service provision is.
Mhm.
That translation is a service, and therefore you've got to understand that you'll have to find your clients, do a bit of client retention. You'll have to market your business. It can involve doing some personal branding. You had a show on that and a
Mhm.
podcast on that, and I thought it was really inspiring. It was really, really good.
Mhm.
Whatever suits your style. You've got to constantly upskill, so engage with CPD because the industry is changing so quickly that you don't want to be left on the roadside. So,
Mhm.
and I think you need to have strong EI, emotional intelligence skills. So EI and not just AI. That's what I'd say. Yeah, because again, you'll have to collaborate with lots of different people, directly or indirectly. It's a very multicultural field. The
Mhm.
call is super diversity, I think. So, and also you've got to understand the kind of pressure points that will come your way and to be able to deal with them. So to
Mhm.
develop flexibility and resilience, some kind of very strong soft skills. Um, it's interesting because Douglas Robinson, in his book Becoming a Translator,
Mhm.
he gives a definition of, like a professional translator or interpreters, and it's a very inspiring definition. But I showed that to my students this week. I say, so he says, translators are obviously bilingual, super curious, and it sounded great, but I was like, well, if I wanted to be a professional translator, that would kind of put me off in a way because I would feel intimidated by the definition
Mhm.
because maybe your profile is not quite like that.
Mhm.
So you've got to be curious, but you won't be always on top of things,
Yeah.
and you've got to cut yourself some slack as well. You can't do everything, and that
Mhm.
will depend on what you want to go into, really. So, yeah, that's the danger with having a definition because some people might not quite fit that, and yet they might be very good professional translators.
Mhm.
Um, so, I think my advice would be that each professional translator should kind of think about what it means for them to be a professional translator and come up with their own definition.
Mhm.
Um, because yeah, there's been quite a bit of talk on that in
Yeah.
the translation is not really a fully recognized profession. In the not like surgeons say. Do you
Mhm.
know? Do you know Catherine Tate? The episode when when she does those. Oh, I can do that, and there's something called the what's it called? Ah, it's about a translator. It was quite basically the offensive translator, Catherine Tate.
Mhm.
And so her boss says, "Oh, I've got a meeting now, and my interpreter's cancelled on me." And well, he says my translators. And so I've got a very important meeting with like people from France, Spain, Sweden, and if only I could find somebody who could jump on and just take over and do the translating for me. And Catherine saying that, "Oh yeah, I can do that." And then you can imagine what it is. It's just a bit of a car crash.
Oh.
That sketch would not work with a surgeon because nobody would even contemplate that somebody can jump in that way.
Mhm.
If it's surgery, you know what I mean? Because surgeons are recognized as professionals fully, but for translators, I think being a professional translator is a sense of identity that you forge yourself, but also collectively by engaging with professional associations, fellow translators, what they say about it, and you create your own sense of identity as a translator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's different in different countries as well. Like some countries do have more recognition for it as a profession compared to other countries. So it's hard to present yourself, I think, sometimes as a professional. But also professionalism in itself has different, like, I mean, I did a talk with Kelsey earlier this year called Professionalism is a Spectrum, and it was about like how professionalism also isn't just like one thing being a professional in general. Like everyone has their own take on that as well. So it's kind of I guess it's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's really interesting though, because clearly being a translator or an interpreter, for me, that is, translators and interpreters are professionals. They're not quite as recognized, but that's because of politics, what society decides is important or not, right? But I think it's important in the meantime that translators and interpreters continue seeing themselves as professionals, because that's how they can sometimes push back against some of the downwards pressures, that are applied by in the industry, where the message that, well, if you don't want to do it, somebody else will do it. But I mean, I see so many really amazing posts on LinkedIn, for instance, by professional translators explaining really clearly what their added value is. And they're a great source for students. That's the kind of stuff that's really great to use with students. But as Joseph Lambert, once we were talking about that, as he said, so Joseph wrote Ethics in Translation. Sometimes you wonder if it's not too much of an echo chamber, like it's translators talking to fellow translators, and we choose who to follow on social media, sadly. So it's how do we get this message out there? How do we engage with the media nationally for the UK to make sure that they understand the importance of having professional translators and interpreters? Because it's hugely important for the economy, but and for other things. It's not a message that's always heard.
Yeah, that's a good point actually, because a lot of the time, especially on LinkedIn and stuff, when we're as translators like posting and stuff, the interaction's always from, at least for me, it's always from fellow translators. And I've found that in my experience, like doing a post that's like aimed at potential clients or companies or anyone like sort of outside of that circle, it just gets zero interaction because those people aren't seeing it. They're not following translators on LinkedIn or whatever. Like it's not, so it's almost like, well, if it's aimed at other translators, it will get more interaction, and then other people that they're connected with and more people might see it. So it's
snowball effect. Yeah,
I don't know. It's a tricky one.
No, I understand. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, if you aim at other translators, people in their network will, if they like it, obviously that will be, this person like this, and then somebody else might see it accidentally in a way, although that's the person you were aiming for to begin with. But yeah, I can see why.
Yeah.
Your primary audience, your secondary audience. No, it's a fair point, but that's why also I'm a firm believer in professional associations. I think that's for the visibility of the profession, that's crucial. Then there are cultural differences. I know that's, well, from what I've heard in France and in Germany, professional associations are probably a little bit better at protecting, the status of the profession, or actually ring fencing it, whatever you want to call it. I think in the UK we're always a bit reluctant to do that because, well, maybe culturally it's more of an inclusive culture anyway. So I think people would be loath to say, you need to have this or that, because then what if this person is great and don't have this degree? So there's always some reluctance to do that. But sometimes it can play against us because then there's no clear definition of what it is to be a professional translator, and anyone can set themselves up as professional translators.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing is that if translation clients don't know about the professional associations and things, and don't know what the letters on the end of your name mean, then it's sort of like, especially when a lot of our clients are working with translators from all different countries, and they might not recognize all the different associations in different countries. I guess it's sort of bringing awareness to them as well. I
Yeah,
don't know.
you're right. And when you think about clients, it's also about making sure that they understand that hiring hiring a professional translator is about, well, not damage limitation, but it's about, making sure that, yeah, you protect your brand, your image, how you communicate. So that I think Lloyd Bingham had a LinkedIn post this week that was really good about that. He said, what did I do this week? And one of the things he did was liaise with a client who'd gone with like a bad translator or what a cheap translator, and
Hmm.
what they produced was absolutely awful, and explain to them why that was not good, and doing it again. I think there's a lot of that as well that needs to happen, to make sure that the general public understands that, say, ChatGPT can do great things. It can,
Hmm.
let's be honest, but it can do awful things as well if it's left unchecked. So
Yeah.
as soon as my first year, I used ChatGPT with the students, just to show to them where their added value is.
Hmm.
Because let's not ignore the elephant in the room. ChatGPT is out there, but there
Yeah.
was neural machine translation before. It's not. I mean, apart from prompting, it's not changed that much. There was a lot of hype around. If you prompt it really well, then you can do great translations. I've tried it, and I'm not entirely convinced. I mean, there are times,
Mm.
it's a great starting point. There are things that are good, but you still need a human translator, the human in the loop, I think.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think Lloyd actually did a post as well where he shared where he got ChatGPT to do a translation, and then he did a translation as well, and you could see the difference in
Yeah,
quality like straight away.
yeah. So that's why I showed to my students, that what we'd done together, and then ChatGPT at the end. Well, this is what you would have got, which probably they did get
Mm.
because they probably used it anyway, which is fair enough. I'm not going to stop them using the technology when it's there. I won't have them to do their translations on a typewriter with a paper dictionaries either. So they've got to use what's at their disposal, but it's using it
Yeah.
intelligently that matters.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it is. I think it is quite a common thing that like clients before they've really worked with translators, they'll just go for the cheapest option, and then you kind of have to just let them, and then wait for them to come back to you when it turns out terrible and they
yeah,
actually need someone to do it properly. Like I've seen quite a bit of that happening, and it's like, I mean, maybe that's just what they need to do at first to then realize and
yeah. No, I see what you're saying.
get
Yeah,
a
yeah.
professional.
Which is a bit frustrating in some ways because you wouldn't do that again. You wouldn't do that with a health problem. You would say, "Oh well, there's a cheap doctor down the road, so I'm going to go and see them. If it doesn't work out, then I go and pay for the qualified one." See what I mean? So
Yeah,
that's the difference,
yeah,
isn't it? It's a bit frustrating that people have to do that, and
yeah.
but
But I
I
get,
think you could have
I
massive campaigns. Yeah, wouldn't
Yeah, I
work.
get it in some sense because, like, if I think about hiring someone for something, I have no idea. Like, for example, if I needed a plumber and, like, I have
Yeah,
no idea anything about plumbing, and if there's two plumbers and I don't understand anything and one's just cheaper than the other, if that's the only, like, difference that I can really see and understand, then I'll probably just go for the cheaper one without really knowing why the other one
yeah,
might cost more or be better. So like I kind of get it if you aren't familiar with the industry and the profession,
yeah,
like you just might not know, and cost is an easy one to see straight away. Well, that's cheaper. Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
yeah. No, that's a fair point. Yeah, that's when you should always see a third one. See?
Yeah. Anyway, that I feel like we've gone on a bit of a gone on a bit of a tangent. Obviously, we talked a bit, quite a bit about how things have developed, and now we have like ChatGPT and all of this. And you also mentioned like when you, I think you said when you were studying, there was a lot of like, what did you say? More, was it more like theory based, or there was less?
Yeah, well, when I did translation, it was mostly in France. It was literary translation, and it was
Oh
really
yeah.
like testing and just very old-fashioned. And
Hmm.
anyway, the way it was assessed was, they kind of would slice up well, they wouldn't show that to us, but their marking scheme was the translation, the source text sliced up into segments, and then equivalent segments for the target text, and then the box ticking, like, did they use the right word? Did they use the right? So you had to second guess what they wanted. See what I mean?
Hmm.
When we know translation is not that at all. Yeah,
So what would you
that was
say?
really.
Would you say that your perception of the industry has also changed since you first started teaching, but also since you studied that? How is your I'm assuming your perception has changed.
Yeah.
How?
Well, it's changed massively, hasn't it? I mean, even though that's since 2010, it's changed quite a lot. Obviously, technology is more and more important, more integrated into the workflows. Machine translation has got much better since 2016, neural machine translation. But what's interesting that in a way, it feels like we're not full circle, but so for a while, we were insistent, so when I first started, it was all about, and rightly so, language skills, but also the culture, knowing the two cultures very well. In fact, a lot of the texts that we use on translation programs were journalistic texts because they contain lots of references, even though that's not necessarily what people translate.
Mhm,
Also, a lot of literary texts, the bias can be explained by the fact that, well, especially in Rust Group universities, but a lot of people who taught translation were from a literary background. So that's what they like best. So that's the kind of text they'd use. Commercial
mhm,
translation was largely ignored. Then I think there's been a bit of a shift gradually towards, we need to teach CAT tools, we need to teach the technology, which has been positive. But then there was a lot of emphasis more on, I think that the kind of stuff that I teach as well, like translation project management, CAT tools, adapt what we do more to the real world. I think
mhm,
lately we've started to realize that's very important, but we also need to keep that emphasis on what language, obviously that's taken for granted, but cultural references, understanding the culture, because
mhm,
that's the added value that human translators bring to translations produced by ChatGPT. So I think for me, what's important for future translators that they be excellent readers, that they can read
mhm,
between the lines, because no machine translation tool will be able to ever translate what's not explicitly stated. They
mhm,
can't translate what's implied, whereas
mhm,
a human translator can. And the whole cultural knowledge, knowing what the translation is for, understanding the client's needs, all of that, that's what you bring. That translation tools, well, generative AI, for instance, is not quite there yet either.
mhm,
Um, so teaching literary translation actually makes sense again, in a way, because that's a good way to train that.
mhm,
I mean, not that it's ever stopped making sense, but you can be justify it on translation programs. Although again, I think it's important to do that whilst preparing students to the fact that a lot of their translation work will be commercial translation, and that it's
mhm.
not necessarily a bad thing. Like you can have a lot of fun translating commercial text. Well, I think so.
Yeah.
um, and that you've not failed as a translator if you translate commercial text and not literary text. If you know what I mean.
Mhm. Yeah.
But so that's how the industry has changed. The translators being seen more as maybe post editors sometimes. Some people see it that way. I still think it's translating, but being relieved of some
Mhm,
of the tedious tasks that were there at first, maybe. Um,
mhm,
I know that there's a whole debate around that, and I personally prefer translating with a starting point. So I quite love the fact that machine translation would give me something to start off with. Like that. I like that,
mhm,
and then I can tear it apart, undo it. But I like the start of having something to go by.
mhm. Yeah. I think, I mean, I've seen an increasing amount of machine translation post editing jobs. And I think some people, yeah, it's a big debate, obviously, but some people love it and some people hate it, and they'll just be like, no,
Yeah,
I'd rather just do it from
yeah.
scratch, completely. But yeah, sort of going back to your book, I was wondering what were sort of the main resources you used for your book, and where did you get your industry insights?
So main resources, and actually that's linked to industry insights, but it's what I call, I think it's Gary Massey who forged the coin with others, language industry studies. So I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, but it's linked to this idea of translator studies, not translation studies. So all of
Mhm,
those, studies that have been carried out with the language industry, a bit like the one that I'm doing with Callum Walker and Joseph Lambert at the moment, where we look at the status of professional translators in the UK. So I read a lot of that extensively, trying to
mhm,
summarize the key findings. because they are empirical studies, so it's not anecdotal. It's you try and find out the trends. So that was my starting point.
Hmm.
Because often they exist, but they've been published in lots of different journals. They've been scattered around, but there was no. They're not really been brought together to that extent yet
Hmm.
for students, to help them with their knowledge of the language industry. And then I talked to professional translators, so sometimes former students, just people I know, post as well. So online blogs and posts on LinkedIn have been very helpful to kind of have a
Hmm.
sense of how people feel about topics and how people respond to them. That's
Hmm.
been a useful source of information as well, actually. So quite varied sources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's interesting thinking that like the things that we're posting on LinkedIn might be, being used for things like this. And I love that like that could then go on to like help like students and stuff become translators in the future. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. See, for me, that's where I see a real synergy between, because for years and years we talked about the divide between academia and the industry, and I can
Hmm.
see why. Because as I said, for a long time, and it's going to sound a bit critical, and it's not the way I mean it, but maybe it is a bit. But for a long time, translation programs again were headed by professors who were trying their best, but their background was literary translation, and they thought, I mean, they probably find it a bit challenging to engage with industry. Not all of them, but some of them, and they shaped translation programs that were mostly literary translation programs, and that's very helpful. But you can see a big divide with the industry where you've got people having to adapt to new technologies all the time, like seeing translation as a service and trying to survive and make money in a cutthroat
Hmm.
industry. And yeah, there was, and I think that's changed a lot. I know a lot of colleagues now who really engage with the industry up and down the country in the UK. Who follow what's going on LinkedIn, and actually LinkedIn is a way to of those posts to have a constant conversation back and forth. So for me
Hmm.
as an academic, it's a great way to see where people are at. Obviously, self-selecting. It's only a few people from the profession who will engage with LinkedIn. Some people might actually be completely disconnected from it, but it still gives you a glimpse into what's going on, and hopefully, having me on this show is kind of the flip side. Your listeners will be able to see what we're doing in academia, in the universities, to train
Hmm.
translators and integrating, as you said, what you're doing. And
Hmm.
that's why I see the constant dialogue between universities and the industry, which I think is great.
Hmm. Yeah, we had a really interesting chat about it in that episode with Callum and Joseph and Sergey. And like another thing, I think like more and more translators are going back to their or contacting the universities where they studied and going back and giving talks or helping out students in some way. So like I
Yeah,
think it is really nice that it's such, because I see the translation community, the community of translators, as like such a sort of collaborative and helpful place. Like everyone from when I first started, like
yeah,
I was always able to ask questions to other people, and everyone's always been so open. So it's really nice that that's like also working together with students, and like we're all sort of helping each other
yeah,
out.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
Lloyd Bingham is a good example of that. Lloyd was a student when I first started at Newcastle. I can't remember if I taught him or not. That's terrible. We didn't know his student, but I know he was there, and I know for a few years when he was still in Newcastle before he moved to Cardiff, moved back to Cardiff, he'd come back regularly and give talks and help out, and so it's a great example of students who've made it into the language industry and come back to help. I know he does a lot in Cardiff as well with Joseph.
Mhm.
So that's great, and for us, that's so valuable
Mm.
because you obviously, especially if you're still young into the profession, our students can really identify with you and think, okay, this person managed to do it, so can I. It's inspirational for them.
Mm. And it's helpful for us as translators as well, because we're like, obviously one of the things you mentioned before was that we do need to be constantly like learning about the new things and doing CPD and that kind of thing. And so having a good connection with universities is helpful for us as well, because then we can kind of find out what the new things are through that as well, and we can learn from the students who are like know all the brand new knowledge and have just studied it. Okay, this is a good one. So obviously there's a lot that goes into being a professional translator. How did you decide what to include in the book and what to leave out?
Yeah, that's another. It's a really good one, but another hard one to answer. I do kind of mention that in the introduction because I knew that people would ask me that. There was so much more that I could have included in the book. One of the big things, obviously, is translation technologies, which I do mention. Is something that I think, especially students, kind of neurotically want to know about because, and I understand that because they're kind of worried about it and they think they need to know that. Problem that is very much a moving target.
Mhm.
So whenever you start writing about translation technology, if you don't write in general terms, it will have moved on by the time the book is out. Something else come up. So I decided to integrate that into the chapters on translation project management and quality assurance because I think that fits nicely there. And quality assurance is part
Mhm.
of translation project management, but it's so big that I decided to have a whole chapter on that because that's again it's an important one, quality assurance, because well, that's linked to client satisfaction, but also this idea that if you don't do it well, you can have a what I think read in Callum's book, but scope creep. When it runs away from you.
Mhm.
So yeah, technology was integrated as part of that. Then one of the things that I wanted is for the books to remain, because the idea that it's a textbook that can be used by colleagues for a course that's about 12 weeks long, 11, 12
Mhm.
weeks, the typical course with say one lecture, one seminar. So for it to remain manageable, so I decided to prioritize. So I thought, okay, what do they need to know before they start? What do they need to know that's really crucial on the job? And what would I like them to kind of stay with them afterwards so that they can last in the job? That was my starting point.
Mhm.
Hence the structure of the book. And I wanted to have 9 to 11 chapters. So the idea was roughly a chapter a week, although some chapters are a bit bigger, so they can be used over 2 weeks. And so that I didn't want it to be overwhelming either. So it did mean leaving some stuff out, but the idea being that we're not going to cover everything. There are things that they'll have to find out by themselves or in other circumstances. But yeah, that was the main idea behind that. I mean, just the
Mhm.
chapter on quality, it could have been the whole book basically. There's so much
Yeah.
to cover when you talk about translation quality, and so debated that. Yeah,
Yeah, and I guess it's the kind of thing, like, because it's such a big topic, it's the kind of thing that, like, if there's one area they really want to delve more into, then there's other
that's it.
research and stuff out there you can read about.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I talked about my book as like the GP of I've got I don't know why actually my dad was a GP. That's probably why I keep having metaphors linked to medicine. But that's the general practitioner. Like and then there's kind of triage. So if you want to find out more, you can
Mhm.
say if you want to find out more about transition project management, get Callum's book. It's great. It's fantastic. If
Mhm.
you want to know more about ethics, then Joseph's book would be a great way to find out more about it. So I'm kind of I'm the nurse that will see you before you see the proper doctors.
I love the analogy. And you've mentioned a bit about your background. Obviously, you're a lecturer in translation studies, but you are also a certified life coach. How has that sort of shaped the way that you wrote the textbook?
It's interesting because I started working on the book before I started doing coaching. So I did a coaching course with the University of Warwick last year, so a PG
Mhm.
course, which I really enjoyed. And I was writing the book as I was doing the course. And I remember the course director talking to me on the phone the summer before, saying, "Oh, you'll have to think about things that you might want to be coached on because you'll be coaching each other." I said, "Well, that's easy. I want to be coached on how to finish that book." But it's yeah, this coaching course has changed, even though the initial proposal was from before, and I'd always kind of had a bit more of a student-centered way of teaching. I want to be the guide on the side and not the sage on the stage. But it's really enhanced that a lot in the way I've prepared the activities with the questions. I've included quite a lot of careers coaching activities into the book,
Mm-hmm.
and to really try and always ask that question: what does this mean to you? And I think the book finishes with the last activity, and the last question is, what is a successful professional translation to you? Because everyone will have their own definition of what that means. Because that's a typical coaching
Mm-hmm.
question. I want to be successful. Yes, okay. What does success look like to you?
Mm-hmm.
So I've integrated quite a lot of that. But in fact, not just in my book, in all my teaching, I've changed quite a lot of things radically. Um, because yeah, we can't start from a deficit position. The idea being they don't know and I need to tell them.
Mm-hmm.
Amongst the people reading the book, some of them will know quite a bit about some topics, and in fact more than I do.
Mm-hmm.
But they may benefit from my own perspective. I might look at it slightly differently. And this idea that I don't know how much they know, I don't know what their situation is, but I want to bring them what I've got and then help them reflect on that and integrate it into their own practice.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
and
I think
do you
it
know coaching a bit, or are you familiar with coaching? Maybe
not
I should have started with
really.
that actually.
I'm not not
Sorry.
really, but it's all making sense to me.
Yeah, so the idea of coaching is that what coaching is a creative conversation with the other
Mm-hmm.
person. Creative because in a way you do make it up as you go along because the coach will only react to what you're saying. So the coach listens attentively to what you're saying, and then based on that, and not just what you're saying, but also what you're not saying, your body language, and based on that, we'll ask what they hope will be powerful questions that will trigger the coachee's thinking. But the main
Mm-hmm.
idea that the coachee has their own solutions. They're whole, they're perfect, they're creative. They don't need fixing. They don't need helping. What you help is the process, if
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean. And
Mm-hmm.
so coaches, often say, "I kind of thought that, but I'd never really verbalized it, or I'd never thought about it so clearly." And that's
Mm-hmm.
what coaching does, is to help you get there quicker. You may have come to that conclusion after 2 or 3 weeks, and through coaching, you might come to that conclusion within a 10, 15-minute conversation by asking
Mm-hmm.
different questions based on what you're saying. And I'm hoping
Mm-hmm.
the book does that as well, that, a lot of things in the book, people would have come to that, but it's kind of helping them get there quicker.
Mm-hmm. It's all about asking the right questions, it sounds like, and
Yeah.
getting them, because that's the other thing you said, like the book isn't country specific or anything like that. So it's the kind of thing where like you might not have all the answers
Yeah.
for them. They kind of need to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, not having all the answers is great because it's liberating. Because maybe it will help me a bit with my imposter syndrome, but I don't think it does though, because I think that's a lot of us in teaching. Sometimes we're very scared of letting go because we've got to be seen as being the experts, and expertise matters. And but I think that to really truly let go, you've got to know a lot about a topic. So I mean, coaching is slightly different from that perspective because you could coach people and they talk about things that you have no idea about, but you bring a different perspective. You just listen to their way of talking about it. So an element of that is great in teaching, but obviously at university level, you would expect the person teaching you to know quite a bit about the topic. And sometimes we're scared of students seeing us as, oh, well, what would she know? What would he know? You're not knowing, their lecturer is not knowing enough and not being legitimate. And therefore we kind of go top down. This is what is happening. This is what you need to know. But it's not necessarily the most helpful way of doing it. So that's why I engage a lot with experiential learning as well. And some students get frustrated, like, why don't you just tell us? Like, well, because I could tell you, but what's the point in that? Because you'll have forgotten tomorrow. You've learned it for your assignment, and that's it. Um, but to decide to let go, you've got to be confident that you know enough, because anything can crop up.
Yeah.
So when you teach like that, like you're not in control anymore, and you've got to accept that. And the same with the book. In a way, people might say, well, it's kind of easy just asking questions like that, but actually, a lot of thinking went into it. It's just a certain way of doing it, which I
Yeah.
think is more helpful. But yeah, that's my
Yeah.
take.
I mean, speaking of having a different sort of perspective on things, do you think that not being a professional translator yourself has allowed you to sort of look at this topic of being a professional translator in a more objective way when it came to writing your book?
In many ways, I think so. I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that I'd be terrible at writing a book about being an academic in a way. Or if I was talking about, say, higher education in the UK in this day and age, I would be probably very critical. So it'd be interesting to get the perspective of somebody who's not from higher education. So applying that to the reverse situation with being a professional translator, I can see that I'm slightly more detached emotionally, because when we're emotionally attached to something, like to a subject, then it can cloud our judgment. Or if I'd been doing things a certain way as a professional translator, it had really worked for me, I might be less open to different ways of doing things. I might think, well, no, but that's the way I do it. That's the correct way. Of course, there are other ways that are fine, but my way's correcter or finer. See what I mean? There's always a bit of that going on in your job, isn't there? Yes, that's so not being involved that way makes me more objective, but I can see that some people might get frustrated by that, because then, I talk about the industry and what's going on, and some people might actually have suffered from some of the change that happened in the last few years, and felt it very strongly, and I won't have had that, so they might get frustrated that I don't recognize it, more, and I can empathize with that. Conversely, some people, I think, well, he's saying that that's an issue. I've never had that as an issue, so I not understand why I'm pointing out some. Because there is a whole chapter where I talk about, I use Joss Morkin's work. Joss Morkin is a lecturer at Dublin City University. So Joss really works a lot with the industry, and he's written a lot about ethical issues with machine translation. Who do the data belong to? Those kind of things, and he wrote a few articles about some of the ethical issues with the whole industry, and I kind of present that to the readers as well, because I think that's important to discuss them. And I think that's quite sensitive, because again, some people might think they're non-issues, other people might have felt them very strongly and think that I should talk about that more. And I can see that the emotional involvement will have an impact on how you read that.
Yeah, it's interesting, because actually, like, when I think about it, when like I've had quite a few like students and stuff like reach out to me and ask me for advice on like how to be a translator, how to get into the industry and stuff. And I've had video calls with students, but I always make it very clear, like, I can only tell you what I know and what I've experienced. Like, I've not done I've not done all the research that you've clearly done, and like, so I don't know how it is all in general, but I can be like, this is what I've done, this is what's worked for me, this is what I've experienced. So it's probably nice that they can have, I think it's good to have both, and they can, like, students can also reach out to people who are professional translators and ask for like their experiences. And obviously there are translators who've also written books on similar topics as well, so I guess it's kind of interesting to get both.
Yeah, and I think, ideally, I'm like, I listen to you, I think, oh, it'd be great to be able to bring that to them, that's lived experience. And I can't bring that to them because, I'm a full-time academic. I don't have the time to, I know that some academics do translating on the side, but I've got a family as well. I don't want to sacrifice all my, you know what I mean? That I don't have the time to do both. I don't think I could do it well anyway. But again, take the analogy of, go back to medicine analogy, like say somebody has a new disease or something like that, and they've got to live with it. Well, I'd be more in the position of the medical professional who would say, there's been studies on this, and this is what people have tended to experience. This is what's tended to work for them. But maybe it's good for them as well to go to a support group where they talk to people who have the same condition and experience the same, that this worked for me, this didn't. See what I mean? I think that you need both. And that's when it's great to be on shows like yours, because then we're talking together, actually, which is the way it should be, because you need both perspectives, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And one of my questions I had for you, which it sounds like it's a no, but have you ever considered becoming a professional translator yourself, or do you see that in your future at all?
It's not a no, actually. I did.
Okay.
When I was in the University of the West of England, I was working there, and then we were made redundant because they were closing down languages. A story that's, quite common nowadays. And at the
Yeah.
time, they were advertising for translators with the European Commission, and I really seriously thought of. I mean, not doesn't mean that I would have got it, but I did think about doing that. And then I was offered the job in Newcastle, and I thought seriously about the one in the commission because my wife works as a lecturer, but she's Irish, but she works as a lecturer in France, so she commutes to
Mhm.
Lille. So that would have been geographically quite nice. But the thing is that I absolutely love teaching, and that's
Mhm.
just I can't explain it. It's just something I absolutely love doing. I'm happy in a classroom. I love it. So and I
Mhm.
love translation, but I would have missed the teaching side of it,
Mhm.
which is why. But I'm not excluding it in the next 10 years or so. It's still something that because teaching is great, but after when you come to a certain age, it can become really exhausting, especially
Mhm.
if you want to do it well. In the classroom, like you don't bring the same level of energy. You bring other things, and we might like that extra flexibility if you're a freelance translator, like in terms of geographical location, stuff like that. So we have discussed that with my wife that maybe in 10, 15 years time, I might actually change paths and go into whatever it will be called. Then may not be, but it will involve coaching anyway because I want to carry on coaching, but to be kind of a language consultant.
Mhm.
In a recent article about that, about MT literacy consultant. That's a new role that's going to be happening, something along those lines with a bit of coaching on the side. I have a portfolio career. That's something I've got in the back of my mind anyway. So I do
Yeah.
have some skin in the game. I am interested in that. If I fail, I'll know that my book is worth nothing.
I mean, that's what I was going to say. You've got a book. You've got
Well,
your book to tell you how to do it if you do decide
yeah,
to
that would
do
be
that.
terrible. I will not tell anyone if I decide to do it because that would just be like too embarrassing. Sorry,
Oh.
yeah, I have thought of that. It has crossed my mind. Maybe I should not do that. Yeah, but no, it's something that I do contemplate, and yeah. But so more of a portfolio career. I don't think I would do just translating, and just
Mhm.
is a terrible word, but just because for me, I would like the contact, so I might still do a bit of teaching, a few hours on the side at the local university wherever I am, that kind of things. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Keeps it interesting, doesn't it?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so what's your favorite part of the book?
yeah. I think I mentioned that earlier. I mean, yeah, I like all of them in some ways, but I do feel quite strongly about the last one, which is the one that I have no idea how it's going to land. Some people might think, well, that's a bit useless. Why is he telling us about that? So it's the last part, which is about keeping it sustainable for translators. And I talk about CPD, which
Mhm.
so that's the first part to it, which I care a lot about. I mean, I'm one of those academics. Academics don't really engage with CPD that often. They engage with their research stuff like that. But I always like doing courses of about random things, including coaching,
Mhm.
um, because it
Yeah.
keeps me. I don't know. It's just always interesting to have different perspectives, and I think CPD can really keep the fire going. That
Mhm.
keep your passion alive, and so it's important not just in terms of developing yourself as a professional for business purposes, but I think it's interesting in terms of remembering to invest time in yourself, that you are a human being who wants to keep learning and not do the same thing over and over again. And that's going
Mhm.
to be key, I think, to a lot of language industry professionals in the future. When the industry changes so quickly, what will remain is how much you invest in yourself, to the not just the hard skills, but also the soft skills like developing your emotional intelligence, etc., etc. That's what will carry you forward. So I
Mhm.
really enjoyed the actually that was one of my references, the episode that you recorded with Lloyd on CPD was I
Mhm.
quoted in the book because he talks really well about it. And that the second part to that chapter is on ergonomics in a way. So what are the potential sources of stress and strain, of tension that can arise in the job? So physical, cognitive, but also social. And what can you do to try and minimize them as a professional translator? Obviously, that I think that you won't be able to solve on your own. That's taken for granted. But whatever you can do, and maybe that's a coaching perspective as well. Whatever you can impact on your own level, just for yourself, then think about what you can do to improve your own quality of life as a professional translator. So that's when I propose a model for self-care for professional translators, because I do see self-care as an ethical imperative. So it's
Hmm.
not it's actually really important, because you can't make very good ethical decisions if you're not feeling well. If you're not, if you're feeling under threat, under pressure, it's going
Hmm.
to impact your ability to make ethical decisions. But also as a professional translator, and that goes back to this idea of being a professional translator is a sense of identity, a sense of belonging to a community, where you owe it to your community in some ways to try and stay in the job for as long as you can. because
Hmm.
because there is, and that's just Morgan saying that as well, that there's been a bit of a brain drain in the profession. A lot of people have left because they don't want to be seen as post editors. They don't like the new conditions, and that makes the whole language industry less sustainable. And we want to
Hmm.
keep those very bright, interested people in the language industry so they can help shape it for a sustainable future.
Hmm.
So the chapter mentions that, and that's with the idea that the book, well, the textbook, I wanted it to be part of this kind of education for sustainability kind of movement. You don't just tell students that's what you need to know, but tell them you'll be the movers and shakers of tomorrow. What are you going to do about the industry you're going to be working for?
Hmm.
So yeah, I care a lot about that part. But maybe some people will hate it and think that's absolutely useless, because some
No,
students just want to translate.
no, but I think
Yeah,
I do think that's really important, and I love that you're like sort of by doing that and by talking about how we need translators like that in the industry to sort of keep it going and stuff. It's also encouraging more of a community feel with it and
yeah,
encouraging people to, because I think one thing I've said quite a few times before is that like seeing other translators as like your supporters and your colleagues and your friends and stuff rather than they're your competition, because I know in like a lot of other industries it's like, I don't know, anyone else that's doing the same thing as you is your direct competition and you should be trying to be better than them and you shouldn't, I don't know, whatever. But like I think as translators, like it's so important that we see each other as our supporters and stuff. And that's why
yeah,
I think like my favorite part, I haven't read through your whole book, but I've looked at all the different sections of it. And my favorite bit was the setting up support networks, because I think that is so, as in,
yeah,
like for me personally, that's something that has really like shaped my whole career and like has probably been the most beneficial thing.
yeah.
So I love that like you've got a whole section on that.
Yeah, it was important to me again because it comes quite early on in the book, so it's the third chapter, even before finding that first job. I think that I encourage my students to do that straight away. They don't all always do it, but it's also about thinking what is meant by support networks. So often, when we talked about that in traditional courses, we talk about professional associations, which are great, are huge, and we talk about them a lot. But that's not the end all and be all. It's just creating that sense of community, and I can see that happening more and more through, again, LinkedIn or social media platforms.
Hmm.
That's where you find your community. That's fantastic. So in that chapter, I also use studies that have been carried out by colleagues. So one colleague, her name is escaping me now, but she wrote a whole PhD thesis on like networks for translators, support networks, in 2012. So it's 10 years ago now, but it's still very valid what she found. And
Hmm.
it was interesting how, because she'd been tracking the translation networks of some professional translators over time, and how they evolve quite a lot. So at the beginning, so for your professional network, you may have a very wide network and know a lot of
Hmm.
people, but over time, your network becomes much smaller, but it's really trusted people. So it's a bit like friendships, basically. We call it
Hmm.
networks, but it's allies, friends. When you go into a new place, you you're friendly with quite a lot of people, but then over time, you know who your true friends are.
Hmm.
Um, your network will evolve over time depending on the situation, what you need, etc. But it's really valuable to not feel like you're on your own in this massive big industry.
Hmm.
Um, I think the first few slides for my lecture on the language industry, which I teach on the postgraduate program, it's got Nemo. because you can feel a bit like a Nemo in the language industry when you first start, like trying to find your way home.
Yeah.
And then you've got like you meet Dora, and then you meet the shark, who's actually a friend. See what I mean? And we
Hmm.
talk about that, like navigating that. And you need a network when you're in something as vast as the ocean. You
Hmm.
need to find your bearings and your friends who will help you and guide you and shape your career in some ways. And then let's also talk about other networks. So I think your family, your friends, they are your
Hmm.
support networks as well,
Yeah.
in different ways, but they're very important, especially if you work
Hmm.
as a freelancer. So yeah, be interesting to hear what your lived experience is on that actually.
Yeah. I think it's good as well to have your translator support network and then like your non-translator support
Yeah,
network, I guess, as well, because a lot of the time we'll have friends and family that are in different industries or have different perspectives on things as well. So they might help solve a problem where you need someone who's not a translator or like to have a different perspective on it or something. And
yeah, it's very similar for academics.
mm,
We work in schools, we work, we are in house. But a lot of us work in fields that are very different to what other academics working in the same unit or school as you. So sometimes you're lucky and you've got people who work in exactly the same field, but a lot of the time you're the only one working in that area. So for
mhm,
me, having a professional network, I would say, we're kind of in the UK, we've been encouraged to see each other as competition. So like Leeds University will be competition to Newcastle, and that's all a bit nonsense. And we refuse to do it that way. And
mhm,
I've created my network of fellow academics who work in the same field, and that sustains me. It really,
mhm,
really does, because they become friends. We have conversations. We learn a lot from each other. We grow together in our field. It's just, and that's so vitally important. I would feel so isolated otherwise. I was thinking, well, what I'm working on, nobody really cares about,
mhm.
because nobody really truly understands it. And imagine if that could feel the same for freelance translators. I mean, that's the way. That's what I was thinking when I was writing that. How
Mm.
important it is to find people who kind of
Yeah.
understand what gets you going.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Now I was talking about this yesterday with Maya Lane because I went up to the Lake District to co-work with her, and we were talking about like all the different people that we're friends with in the industry and where we've met them and how it like helps us now. And we were saying about like how we have so much more confidence now, like going to a translation event or a conference or something, because either we're probably going with someone that we know or we're likely to meet someone there who we know from LinkedIn or
Yeah,
something else. So it's like a lot less scary, like doing other things
yeah, it gives you
just because
confidence,
you like
doesn't
this.
it? Yeah,
Yeah.
I can relate to that. It's about not being a lone fighter, not feeling that you're fighting on your own, but knowing that there's a whole community behind you,
Mm.
there to help, and that if you want to organize something or do something, you know who you can ask. And yeah.
Yeah. And also like when setting up events yourself, like
Mhm.
me, Mylene and Chloe like set up a business retreat for translators and we had our first one last month up in the Lake District. And
Amazing.
doing it knowing that A, we had each other like working on it together, but also B, knowing that we knew enough people that would want to come to actually make it feasible to do, if that makes sense. Like we we already
Yeah,
had friends that we knew would be interested in coming, so we were like, well, we know this will work before we even
yeah.
kind of launched it.
Yeah, I think, fundamentally, I believe that as human beings, we're stronger when we work together. So,
Mm,
I mean, some people decide that their career will just be theirs and they'll be on their own. But for me, a lot of the great things that have happened in my career have been through my network, so to speak. But actually, people have become friends. So with Olga Castro is at Warwick now. We set up APTIS, the Association of Programs of Translation and Interpreting Studies. Started by, we got on really well. We were at events together. We thought, what, we should do something. And we did
mm,
it together, had great fun working together on that. It's just, the best things happen through that when you know that you've got somebody who's got your back as well. And, you can, I just, I suppose, makes you feel better about yourself when you work with somebody who's
mm.
like that. It gives you energy.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for
So
sure.
yeah, I would encourage translators to do that,
Yeah.
definitely, because maybe that's a reason why some of them. quit as well sometimes, that they feel a bit isolated.
Yeah, I do think it's the kind of thing where you could easily get quite isolated if you're not putting yourself out there and
Yeah,
trying to make connections.
yeah.
Um, but
But then there is a great community, as you say, in the UK. I can see that. I'm not a professional translator, but through LinkedIn, I can see there's a massive community. In fact, that goes across borders because you've got translator connecting with translators from France, lots of different countries. It's amazing. It's so supportive, so nice to each other. Always, I'm always very impressed by how supportive people
yeah,
are. Well, that's
yeah,
my experience on LinkedIn anyway.
yeah. I mean, I had 2 whole tables of translators at my wedding, almost
Wow,
all of which I'd met through LinkedIn.
that's
Like,
amazing.
so it's like to the point where I'm inviting them to my wedding. Like, they're not just my colleagues, you know.
Yeah. They become friends. Well, that's the same, like when I talk about people like Olga or Joseph, Callum, they're friends, that they're not just colleagues. You end up creating a proper friendship and feeling stronger for it. Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to your book, what is the biggest takeaway you'd want or expect somebody to have after reading and working through your book?
That's really good questions. You should be a coach. Uh, um, I'd like them to think, okay, it won't be a walk in the park, setting myself up as a freelance translator, but it is possible.
Mhm,
Freelance, actually, I say freelance, but it's not true. It's also in-house. It covers both. So breaking into or making into the language industry won't be a walk in the park. I mean, I think that nobody should think that because you've got to be prepared for the fact that it's very competitive. It's
mhm,
difficult, but it is possible, and it can be a very rewarding job in many, many ways.
mhm,
I think that's what I like. And for people to say, I can do this. I may fail sometimes. There may be hurdles. I may fall, but I'll pick myself up, dust myself off, and I'll be fine.
mhm.
Yeah.
I love that. So when's your book going to be published and where will it be on sale?
So it's in production as we speak. I was sent the book cover 2 days ago.
Oh,
So that's exciting.
mhm,
I think probably this side of Christmas or just the other side of Christmas.
mhm,
Because yeah, it's in production, so it shouldn't be too much longer. I haven't been given an exact date yet, but
mhm,
soon enough, back end of this year or beginning of next year. Yeah.
mhm,
And where will it be on sale? Routledge.
mhm,
So they're the publishers, Taylor and Francis Routledge. So probably most big retailers will be able to get a hold of a copy.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, it's good. Good to know for anyone who wants to buy the book when it's out. So, yeah, do you have any final pieces of advice for aspiring translators?
Yeah. I would say keep an open mind. Don't think, I want to be a translator and do this, and have a set idea what you might want to do. Because I mean, obviously, it's great to have aspirations of where you want to be as a translator, but the market may not be where you are, or there may be a discrepancy. So keep an open mind as to what the market needs.
Mhm,
Um, so that's there are things in the book to help you with that. If you're looking for a job in house, don't apply for jobs that say translator only. I think there was like can't remember the exact figure. I'm terrible at figures, but I read that was Slater that said that there was 700 different job titles in
mhm,
a given year. The language industry, has become so complex that there are lots of different job titles, and sometimes it's more or less like the same as being a translator, but may not call it a translator. So keep an open mind as well. Don't dismiss jobs because you don't see the word translator. Maybe
mhm,
drill a bit more, try and find out what it is. And even if it's not exactly what you want, you might think, well, that's a step in. That's a way to get into the industry, and then often there's some scope to kind of shape the job anyway once you're in the job.
mhm,
Job crafting, I think it's called. So
mhm,
keep an open mind again. And maybe another one that's not directly related was something I wanted to mention earlier about how much the industry has changed and how we adapt to it has changed as well. I think 10, 15 years ago, it was quite good to say to students, have 2, 3 different languages. Well, add, well, 3 is quite a lot already.
Mm.
In the age of AI, I'm really skeptical about the need to have so many languages when you first start in the job. I'd say
Mm-hmm.
have one, maximum 2 languages that you really speak well, command well. They can really read really well in the text,
Mm-hmm.
and you know a lot about the culture and the cultural differences. Might be more helpful than being a language collector and having lots of different languages, but that you don't master that well,
Mm-hmm.
and you won't be able to, and nor the culture for that matter, you won't be able to add so much value as a human translator yourself. I'd be
Mm-hmm.
quite interested to hear what you think about that as a translator. Would you agree
Mm.
with this advice?
Yeah, I mean, when I was doing my masters, I was like, right, I'm gonna learn another language alongside. Like I'd already,
Yeah,
obviously I've got English, but I'd learned German and Dutch, and I was like, right, I want another language. That's like the next step. So like while I was doing my masters, I started learning Mandarin along the side. Obviously not the easiest language to learn,
it's a big investment
and
for potentially a low return, if you know what I mean. I'm too pragmatic,
yeah,
mate. But
and
yeah, I think investment return is something you need to factor in.
but I think I studied it. Well, I didn't really, as in I did like evening classes for like a couple of years. And I also went to Beijing and did like a 2 week intensive course there
Yeah,
and stuff. And I mean, I don't speak Mandarin at all now. Like it just didn't, I couldn't really get very far with it. And I think I also realized actually I don't really need another language. Like,
yeah,
I don't think I have the capacity to translate
yeah,
German, Dutch, and another language. Like you can't even take on that much work anyway, and it
and
gets confusing having
yeah,
all this going on in your head. But like, I'm glad I did it. It was a good experience,
yeah,
and I made some really good friends when I went to China as well. But like, yeah, I think it's. I agree with you that it's probably more sensible to spend that time really understanding the languages that you've already got and
yeah.
working on that rather than needing to go and learn a
Yeah,
million
and I mean,
different
I'm not
languages.
saying that to put people off, because obviously, if you really want to learn a language, that's kind of your dream, and do it by all means, but don't necessarily expect it to become something professional straight
Mm-hmm.
away. It might take, maybe you'll have to do 10 years of Chinese on the side for it to be at a level where you can really start working with it. And that
Yeah,
happens. But if you want to quickly do another language, I would say do a language that's related to one of the languages you already speak. So Dutch and German seems perfectly sensible
yeah,
to me. Like French and Italian, they're so close, being
mm-hmm.
different, but you only read it. So if all you want to do is to be able to read the language and translate into your English, because that's the case for most English speaking translators, then that's fine. But I would also advise my students to find languages that are quite close
Mm-hmm.
if they really want to use it professionally. But I would say that if you were looking for a translator and you had somebody who just started and they advertise that they can translate from like 5 or 6 languages into English, I'd be a bit suspicious, to be honest.
Yeah. I
See
I
what
would be
my,
like, are
my
you
reaction would be,
just
are you sure? See what I mean? But
yeah,
in a way, you can play against you at some stage.
yeah.
Yeah, you've got to be careful how you brand yourself, and yeah, you can't be an expert in everything.
Yeah,
It takes
I think
time.
I'd be worried that they were just going to outsource it to other translators because
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's the case a lot of the time when it's like we do 10 plus languages and you're like, okay, well clearly you don't
yeah.
personally do
Or if you do,
all of that.
I'd be interested to see the quality of the work. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's, I think, because translation is moving, and again, that's when the industry is changing. It's going towards like, well, human translation is more for higher quality
Hmm.
levels. What's required. Then to offer that higher level of quality, then you need to really master the language and the culture, and going back to what we were saying earlier. I mean, it's going to sound awful, I'm going to say, but I have a gut feeling that there won't be much room for mediocre translators, if you know what I mean. Like people who
Mm.
just, they've got language and they think, okay, I'll do translating, but they don't really understand why it's so bad. I think that's going to probably disappear, when before language technology, that maybe there was more room for them because they would be charging a bit less, they would do it slightly differently, but the language technology was not good enough to replace them. But now it is in some ways. So I think that's where the big difference is, which could ironically lead to greater professionalization for translators because they'd be working at a higher level. But that's my hope anyway.
Yeah, it'd be nice if that helps to sort of bring rates up and stuff as well, because I still find a lot of even like big translation agencies are just going for getting people to work for peanuts, and it's like, surely, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's when I'd like to see more work, especially in the UK, on translators working more closely together as a collective. I mean, a bit like unions, so to speak, to kind of try and establish some kind of a minimum, a benchmark, like say, okay, well, professional translators should charge at least that. And I know that there are attempts to do that, but it would be good. I'm not sure it's realistic.
It's a difficult one as well, because obviously everyone has, well, we're global, so everyone's living in different countries with a different cost of living.
True.
And also everyone is in a different situation or has different circumstances where they need to earn different amounts of money, and we all have different level of experience or different specializations. But I think it's just like, I don't know that you necessarily can have like, but at the same time it would be nice if we could collectively get paid more.
Well, if at least there was a threshold, a bit like a minimum wage, you know what I mean? Because I know what you're saying about people living, but I'm talking about the UK situation, and then okay, that translator is living abroad, but then should they really be considered when you talk about the UK situation? Probably that they are competition in effect, but you can't you can't do that globally. Already at UK level is difficult, but the problem that then if they kind of obviously undercut, like prices for people who work in the UK, that's really, really tricky. There's no easy solution, but at least maybe starting the conversation, talking about this more, would be a great beginning. The answers are not necessarily what matters, the questions, are we going to deal with it, and what could be done to make sure that the profession remains sustainable? Because the danger that we're facing otherwise, that more and more people leave the profession, but then those large language models, what are they going to use to, what are they going to feed off in a way? You starve the monster, won't you? So the professional translator, that's still very much in need, especially by people programming those, the generative AI, because it uses corpora of translations made by human translators. Otherwise, the machine feeds back, and it's a vicious circle, isn't it? So it's trying to get the industry to understand that and to recognize that more. Not sure how, but that would be
we just have the questions, not the answers.
Yeah, but I think the questions are more powerful than the answers. I think it's just if you could make them, if collectively you could make the language industry, who's the language industry, but at least like there's more of an awareness of the danger for the profession long term and sustainability, including using large language models if they can't be trained off proper corpora with updated language. It's going to be a massive issue.
Right, I think we've talked about we've covered quite a lot. No, it's been really, really, really interesting. We're sort of coming to the end, so if you're happy for my listeners to sort of get in touch if they've got any more questions or anything. Okay, where's the best place to find you? How should they do that?
Well, you can Google me, JC Penet, Penet, and then if you do that and Newcastle University, you find my page there. But my email address, jc.penet, Penet, at newcastle.ac.uk. Can drop me an email and be happy to answer if I can. I might answer with another question.
I'll put it in the show notes as well, so
excellent.
It's easy to find. But yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dot. Really enjoyed it. Yeah,
it's been. I feel like we've had a really interesting conversation.
We did. Yeah, no, it's been really good. We've got to carry on, have another conversation at another stage. Maybe not for the podcast, but we've got to keep talking. I think that's enough for the listeners. It's been really enjoyable. So yeah, keep in touch, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dot.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Meet the Translator podcast. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my chat with JC as much as I enjoyed having it. As usual, there'll be links in the show notes for anything mentioned in the episode. Thank you to JC for joining me. If you have any comments or questions about the podcast in general, send an email to meetthetranslator@gmail.com.